Imagine standing at the edge of daylight as it thins like cooling wax, the last warmth of the sun brushing your skin before surrendering to shadow. There are no bulbs waiting to bloom to life, no streetlights ready to hum overhead, no quiet background glow, promising that the world will stay visible. Darkness simply arrives, complete and unquestioned, as it always did for people who lived their entire lives without electricity. In that moment, the sky is not a canvas but a curtain, and once it falls, there is no lifting it again until morning. You can feel time itself slowing down, as though the world has exhaled and is holding its breath for the long hours ahead. If you find calm in these quiet journeys through the past, take a second to settle your own space. Dim the lights, let the room fall still, and let your thoughts wander backward to a world where the night ruled every rhythm of life. Tell me where you're listening from, and what hour it is for you right now, so we can share the same dusk across centuries. Night in the Middle Ages was not decorative or comforting. It was a condition to endure, a teacher of patience, and a reminder of how fragile safety could feel when light itself was a resource that could be spent and lost. The absence of electricity shaped every habit, every piece of architecture, every sound people made after sunset. The day's work, the timing of meals, even the way bodies rested, everything bent toward the single truth that once the sun disappeared, sight and certainty disappeared with it. You begin to sense what medieval evening felt like before you can fully see it. The light weakens first, colors collapse into grey, and then the world contracts until only the nearest objects remain sure. Villagers hurry to finish what the day demands. Tools are set aside, animals guided home, water drawn one last time. This isn't panic but rhythm, as ordinary to them as checking a phone might be to us. For them, darkness is not an event, it is an authority. Houses gather people in like small fortresses. Walls are thick, ceilings low, windows narrow, slits meant to trap warmth rather than offer view. Inside, blackness waits patiently, until someone coaxes a spark to life. A hiss, a crackle, a small bloom of orange light, then a hearth glows at the room's center, the only island of certainty in an ocean of shadow. Fire becomes more than heat. It is the boundary between existence and the unknown. You watch how quickly people adjust around it. Faces lean toward warmth, voices fall softer, movements grow deliberate. Firelight flickers unevenly, creating pockets of visibility that shift and vanish. It reveals the world, not all at once, but in fragments. Hands working a pot, the shine of metal, the glint of an eye before retreating again into the dark. To live without electricity is to live by these fragments, to understand that light will never be steady or sufficient, and that the night will always claim back whatever it lends. Outside, the village exhales. Doors close, shutters thud, the last human noises fade into a heavy quiet. What remains are softer sounds, the slow crack of timber cooling, the low sigh of wind through thatch, the breath of animals settling. Time does not vanish. It thickens, stretches, becomes something you feel in the body more than see with the eyes. Here, without electricity, the coming of night is not a pause but a transformation, a ritual older than memory, beginning again every time the light withdraws. Inside the house, the fire rules everything. It dictates warmth, visibility, and the rhythm of conversation. Around it, people sit close not out of affection, but out of necessity. The way planets hold close to the faint gravity of a small sun. The flames breathe uneven, rising and falling with the smallest draft, casting faces that appear and disappear as if the light itself were remembering and forgetting them in turns. Every movement near the fire is an act of calculation. A log added carefully, a pot turned just enough to catch heat, a spark suppressed before it grows wild. The fire comforts, but it also commands respect. Historians write about how medieval families treated their hearth like a living presence, never left entirely alone, never fully trusted either. The open hearth was light, warmth, and danger, all in one. A fire that died meant freezing. A fire that lived too freely meant losing everything you owned to smoke and flame before dawn. People learned this early. not through instruction but through repetition, by watching, by listening, by fearing what might happen if vigilance slipped. The light from the hearth does not reach far. Beyond a few meters, the room collapses into darkness, so deep that even outlines seem to vanish. Yet in that half-visible circle, life continues. Someone mends a tool, another stirs a pot of coarse pottage that smells of barley and onions. A child curls near the dog for warmth. You realize how much energy is spent simply maintaining comfort. How many hours are devoted not to progress or leisure but to endurance. There are no lamps glowing gently in corners, no steady current feeding the night. When the fire burns low, people do not simply turn a knob or press a switch. They must decide whether to use more fuel or let the darkness grow. Each choice has weight. Wood means labor, tallow means cost, and cost means survival. Light is not free, it is borrowed. The smell of the room tells its own story. It is thick and layered: smoke, damp earth, sweat, wool, and cooked grain. You can almost feel it on your tongue. There is no scent of modern cleanliness here, no perfume to disguise the work of living. Yet to the people inside, it is the smell of safety. To step outside after dark is to risk losing that fragile warmth to the unseen world beyond the door. Voices change when spoken by firelight. They become slower, quieter, as if the darkness itself listens. People tell stories not to entertain, but to stay awake, to keep the fire company while it breathes. Tales travel easily from village to village, warnings disguised as wonder, humor built from hardship, memory shared so it won't vanish like the light. It is here, in these murmured hours, that superstition takes shape, not as ignorance, but as the human need to explain what cannot be seen. Sometimes the talk fades. The room falls into a long collective silence. No one rushes to fill it, because silence is familiar company. The fire snaps softly, the wind hums through the cracks in the wall, and you feel your body aligning with the slow pulse of the medieval night. For people here, firelight is not just illumination. It is identity. It defines where the household begins and where the world ends. Beyond its reach lies uncertainty, and beyond uncertainty lies fear. But within its trembling circle, life persists, fragile and glowing, until the embers fade and the house must yield once again to the waiting dark. The fire does not die all at once. It withdraws slowly, like a creature retreating into its burrow, light shrinking inward until only a few trembling embers remain. The room follows suit, contracting around the fading glow until distance disappears and only nearness matters. You begin to understand why medieval people spoke of darkness not as absence but as presence. It had texture, movement, a weight that could be felt pressing softly against the skin. Without electricity, there is no gentle transition from day to night, no hum of appliances, no faint blue glow to resist the dark. When the last ember cools, the world becomes almost absolute. The only light that remains is the faint wash of moon or star through the narrow slit of a window, more suggestion than illumination. Even that small shimmer shifts with clouds, so the room breathes with a rhythm tied to the sky. Eyes struggle at first, trying to separate object from shadow, but the effort fades. Vision yields to memory. People learn to navigate by habit. The table is here, the wall there, the bed just beyond the fire's edge. In such blackness, sound grows large. A mouse scurrying across the floorboard sounds deliberate. The sigh of timber settling becomes a living voice. Darkness does not erase the world, it rearranges it. There are rules now, whispered, but firm. Movement is careful, speech subdued, laughter rare. The dark teaches restraint, because mistakes here are costly. A misplaced step could mean injury. A dropped ember could mean ruin. Quiet becomes survival. The house listens with you, creaking gently, as the night air cools the beams. You sense the roof drawing its breath, the walls adjusting to the change in temperature. The building itself seems awake. The air thickens. It smells of old smoke, cooling ash, wool, and human closeness. You feel how the night gathers these scents and folds them together until they become one. The odor of living through darkness. It is neither pleasant nor unpleasant. It is continuity made physical, a mixture of all the hours that came before, distilled into quiet air. Outside, the village has vanished into stillness. Dogs have curled by thresholds, cattle breathe in slow rhythm in their stalls, and the sky above them all is a heavy, seamless cloth. No lanterns mark paths between houses, no window glows faintly to hint at wakefulness. The entire settlement has become a single organism resting, waiting, holding its warmth tight until dawn returns. Inside, conversation dwindles to murmurs and sighs. A log is shifted, a blanket drawn higher, a prayer muttered half aloud. People do not fight the darkness. They accept it as the final authority of the day. Time loses its edges. Minutes and hours dissolve into the slow drift of breathing and the faint crackle of cooling ash. Lying there, wrapped in rough wool and smoke, you realize that medieval night was not truly silent. It was full of small, persistent life, breath, heartbeat, whisper, wind, and each sound mattered because it was all that stood between you and nothingness. The darkness does not frighten you now. It feels ancient, patient, and strangely kind. And as your thoughts begin to slow, you understand the truth that every person of that age already knew that night. Once it arrives, cannot be escaped or mastered. It can only be endured with calm, with stillness, and with the quiet faith that light will return. Sleep in the Middle Ages did not come as it does to us now, sudden and complete, commanded by switches and alarms. It arrived in waves, gentle and patient, like mist spreading across the floor. Bodies shifted closer to one another, blankets heavy with use and scent, straw crackling faintly beneath the weight. The day's noise dissolved slowly, replaced by breathing, slow, uneven, human, and the quiet settling of the house into its own pulse. The cold was constant, pressing at every edge of the room, seeping through gaps in stone and wood, creeping along the floor until it found ankles and wrists. People learned to fight it, not with comfort, but with proximity. Families, servants, travelers, even animals at times, everyone gathered near warmth. The shared bed was not a symbol of luxury. It was a tool of endurance. Cloaks doubled as blankets, hoods stayed on even in sleep. Privacy, that modern dream, was a luxury no one expected. Warmth mattered more than solitude. The first sleep came easily. Exhaustion was certain after the labor of daylight hours, fieldwork, cooking, mending, tending to animals, fetching water, all bound to the rhythm of the sun. Eyes closed without effort. Yet sleep was not one long descent. It was divided, like the day itself. People often woke in the middle of the night, naturally, calmly, as if called by some instinct. This interval between first and second sleep was quiet, reflective, and strangely sacred. Some prayed in the dark, whispering familiar words to an unseen listener. Others tended the fire, rekindling embers to ensure warmth would last until dawn. Some simply sat awake, thinking of work undone or of lives elsewhere, their minds unguarded in a way daylight never allowed. Monks rose to chant nocturnal prayers, their voices echoing softly in cold stone chapels where candlelight shimmered against walls that breathed centuries of devotion. Farmers and townsfolk, though far from cloisters, often shared the same rhythm unknowingly, their bodies obeying the same ancient measure of night and rest. Dreams filled the spaces between these phases, vivid and strange in the absence of artificial light. Without electric glare to dilute imagination, sleep came deep and tactile. People dreamt of weather, of lost family, of the saints they prayed to, or the spirits they feared. These visions mattered. Dreams were interpreted as signs, warnings, or comfort, and morning conversations often began with their retelling. When the second sleep came, it was heavier, quieter, unhurried. Outside, frost settled on fields, and roofs whispered under its weight. Inside, bodies curved into each other's warmth. The dark no longer felt oppressive now. It was soft, familiar, earned. There was no sense of hours passing, only the slow drift of existence toward morning. Scholars still debate whether medieval people slept better or worse than we do now, but lying there in imagination you sense a deeper truth. They did not measure rest by efficiency. They accepted sleep as a dialogue with the world around them, a shared act between body, night, and flame. To sleep without electricity was to yield, to let the universe hold you for a while in its quietest hour. The air thickens with breath and the fading scent of smoke. Even the smallest sounds, an ember sighing, a distant bell marking the sacred hour, feel like part of a single great rhythm that binds everything alive beneath the medieval sky. And slowly, as consciousness folds in on itself, the night becomes not something to survive, but something to trust. Morning in the Middle Ages did not arrive abruptly. It crept in softly, like a secret being remembered. There were no alarms, no sudden brightness, no hum of current spilling through a house, only the slow, silvery expansion of light through narrow openings in the walls. Before sight returned, sound did. The first clues were small and familiar. The distant call of a rooster, the faint shifting of livestock in their stalls, the dull clatter of a pail against wood. These were not intrusions, but invitations, reminders that the world was stirring again beyond the darkness. Inside, breath began to change rhythm. One person turned, another sighed. A child murmured half in dream. The cold was still there, patient and unmoved, but the worst of it had passed. Even the air smelled different, sharper, cleaner, touched by frost and smoke. It carried the faintest promise of movement. Someone sat up slowly, rubbing their arms for warmth, waiting for enough light to recognize shapes again. The fire in the hearth was now a shallow bed of ash, grey and sleeping, but beneath its surface, small embers still glowed, a quiet persistence that never quite surrendered through the night. You imagine the first hands reaching for them, practiced and sure, nudging the ash aside, feeding the faint red core with kindling so small it almost feels symbolic. Then a single exhale, a whisper of smoke, and light returns, fragile, golden, alive. Fire is born again, not as spectacle but as necessity. Its warmth spreads slowly, waking both people and space. For a few moments morning and night coexist, darkness still hanging in corners, light pushing gently against it. It is neither day nor night, but something in between, a moment of balance that people then and now rarely notice. There is no rush, no urgency. The day will begin when the light decides it's ready. Outside, frost clings to thatch and branch, turning every surface into a shimmer of quiet silver. You can almost hear it melting, the slow drip of water as sunlight reaches it. Smoke from the first rekindled fires rises lazily from chimneys, curling against the pale sky. The village reappears piece by piece, roofs, fences, a dog stretching in the yard, the blurred shapes of people stepping into cold air with purpose. Inside the home, life resumes its routine. Coarse bread is broken, watered ale or weak beer is poured, hands are warmed over the growing fire. There are no screens, no clocks, no noise, but the small, steady murmur of survival. The light, once lost, is again the world's most valuable gift. People move differently under it, slower, gentler, as if remembering that warmth is something earned. You realize how deeply the night shapes the morning here. Every beam of light feels like mercy, every sound like proof that the world still exists. Electricity gives us permanence, but the medieval morning gave them renewal, a quiet rebirth earned through patience. And so, as the sky brightens fully and the day begins, you feel what they must have felt, that fragile gratitude that comes from having endured the darkness and woken to another chance. The fire crackles louder, footsteps grow more certain, and the rhythm of labor begins again. The night has done its work, teaching humility, endurance, and the quiet art of trust. And in the pale morning light of a world without electricity, people rise once more, ready to build, to mend, to hope. When daylight finally arrives, it does not burst across the landscape in brilliance, but seeps in like water through cloth, pale and diffused, touching first the tops of roofs and frost-silvered fields before trickling down to doorways and dirt. In this light, the world feels clean and new, as though the night's silence has washed it of yesterday's noise. People move into it carefully at first, adjusting eyes that have known only darkness for hours. The village stretches, exhales, and begins again. Morning in the Middle Ages is not a leisurely hour. It is purpose itself taking shape. Every task that could not be done by firelight now demands attention. Wood must be gathered, animals fed, water drawn, tools inspected. The pace is steady but unhurried, because daylight is precious and finite, and wasting it is a kind of sin. There is no electricity to extend its grace, no second chance to recover lost light. The sun itself is the clock, the taskmaster, the heartbeat of every life. In the fields, the ground is stiff with cold, but people begin their work anyway. Hoes and spades strike the soil with a muffled rhythm. Boots press through frost. Breath hangs visibly in the air. Each sound, each movement is a small defiance against the long night that came before. You can almost hear the landscape waking. The cluck of chickens, the bleat of goats, the distant echo of a hammer meeting wood. These are the sounds of survival, layered together into the slow song of a new day. Inside the home, the fire burns brighter now. Pots simmer again, and the smell of coarse bread and broth fills the small space. Smoke curls upward, threading through beams blackened by centuries of the same routine. Women spin wool by the hearth or tend to children half asleep beside them. Men move between doorways, checking livestock or repairing tools, while the oldest of the household murmurs prayers for health and calm weather. Each role is understood without command, passed down like memory itself. The sun climbs higher, but it never feels excessive. Its warmth is thin, its reach incomplete, yet everyone works beneath it as if it were sacred, and in a way it is. Without electricity, daylight is divine currency. Every hour a coin that must be spent wisely before darkness claims it back. You feel how this truth shaped every part of life, from architecture to behavior. Windows were built wide to capture more of it, courtyards angled to follow its path, and labor timed by its rise and fall rather than by number or schedule. As the morning deepens into afternoon, the village becomes its own small symphony. Hammers on wood, hooves on soil, laughter from a doorway, the hiss of cooking fat. Each sound a thread in the same woven fabric of work. Even the silence between these noises feels deliberate, filled with thought and focus. No light bulbs hum, no machines blur one task into another. The pace of life is entirely human, measured by breath, by muscle, by the turning of the sky. And when clouds pass across the sun, dimming the world for a moment, you understand how dependent everything is on light. A shadow can change the rhythm of an entire village, pause hands mid-motion, remind people how quickly brightness can vanish. Electricity has made light endless. Here it is fleeting, and therefore cherished. Daylight is not simply utility, it is hope made visible, fragile and fleeting, but always returning. The people who lived by it learned something we have forgotten, that every moment of brightness is borrowed, every shadow a quiet teacher. As the sun begins to lower again, long and gold across the fields, work slows, tools are gathered, doors are checked, and the fire that survived the night is readied once more for the hours to come. The cycle begins to close, not as an ending, but as continuity. The day has done its work. And now, once again, the light prepares to leave, as it always does, asking only that we remember how to live without it. By late afternoon, the light begins to tilt, and the world takes on that gentle melancholy that always comes before the dark. The sun's warmth softens, its color turns from white to amber, and shadows stretch long across the earth, as if reluctant to let go. People feel it before they see it. That subtle thickening of the air, the deepening of tone in every sound. The day begins to withdraw, and though no one names it, everyone knows what it means. Work must end soon. The rhythm of the village slows, In fields and workshops, hands grow deliberate, finishing one last task before the light fades beyond recovery. There are no street lamps waiting to continue the day, no switches to prolong it. Every act now is a negotiation with dusk. Tools are wiped clean, animals led to their shelters, doors are tested, and water is drawn one final time. The evening is not leisure, it is preparation. It demands care because anything forgotten now will stay undone until tomorrow. As the sun slides lower, its light turns golden, then red, then the dull bronze of embers. It spills across thatched roofs and uneven roads, reflecting off water troughs and small windows, making everything look momentarily holy. The simplest object, a wooden bowl, a bundle of straw, a child's worn shoe, glows as if touched by memory itself. It is a kind of farewell that repeats every day, never less beautiful for its familiarity. Inside the houses, warmth begins to matter again. Fires are fed with measured hands. The same ritual unfolds in countless homes, sparks rising, kindling, crackling, breath coaxing life into flame. The fire's light once more defines the borders of the world. Shadows creep into corners, waiting their turn to rule. You can smell the change, the faint sweetness of burning wood mingling with the heavier scent of earth cooling after the day's heat. It is the smell of transition, of a world sliding gently back into the arms of night. People eat now, not in silence, but in calm. Wooden bowls, coarse bread, broth, perhaps a little ale. The conversation is low, practical, tender. Someone speaks of weather, of animals, of small things that matter only because they fill the time between day and sleep. Laughter, when it comes, is soft and short, swallowed by the thickening dark. Outside, the sounds of the village fade one by one. A gate creaks, a dog barks once, then quiet. The world is tucking itself in. The evening carries a strange peace, not the comfort of modern lamps or screens, but the slow settling of a world that knows its limits. People do not resist the night, they meet it. A candle may be lit if the task is urgent, but most things can wait. Energy is precious, and so is rest. The body understands this rhythm instinctively, the way tides understand the moon. As the last light disappears beyond the horizon, the land becomes an outline, the air turns colder, and the village seems to draw a single deep breath. The day is over, and with its ending comes neither regret nor relief, only acceptance. The medieval world never tried to conquer darkness. It lived with it, shaped by its lessons, comforted by its return. In the doorway, a figure looks once more toward the fading sky, a habit older than history, and then steps inside. The door closes. The fire glows. The silence settles. A night, patient and eternal, begins again. Darkness, for people of the Middle Ages, was not an enemy to be fought. It was a companion, unpredictable, powerful, and deeply alive. To live without electricity was to live in dialogue with it, to negotiate rather than conquer. The night was not simply absence, it was presence, heavy as breath, full of things that could be heard but not seen, felt but not named. Faith and fear met here in equal measure. Priests spoke of darkness as a test of the soul, a time when sin and temptation whispered most clearly, when prayer became both shield and comfort. But outside the church walls, people found other meanings. Darkness softened boundaries. It made rich and poor, young and old, indistinguishable. It was a democracy of shadow where all light, no matter how faint, was sacred. When the world vanished into blackness, people turned inward, thought replaced vision, and imagination filled the empty spaces. Stories were told not just to pass time, but to make sense of what could not be controlled. Spirits that wandered roads, saints who appeared in dreams, strange lights moving over fields at night. To us they sound like superstition. To them they were explanations, small islands of meaning in a sea of mystery. Medieval people knew darkness intimately. They walked through it, worked by it, prayed within it, and slept under it. They learned its sounds, the way wood settles as it cools, how wind moves through thatch, how animals breathe differently after midnight. They trusted their senses to tell them when danger approached, and their faith to guide them when it didn't. Darkness was not terrifying because it was unknown, but because it was familiar, because it came every night, and would always come again. In monasteries, darkness was sacred. Monks rose from sleep to chant their prayers while most of the world still dreamed. Candles flickered in cold stone corridors, smoke rising like breath toward vaulted ceilings. Their voices echoed through the stillness, not defying the night but harmonizing with it. The idea was not to dispel darkness but to acknowledge it, to fill it with devotion so that it would not feel empty. Even ordinary households shared in that quiet faith, a mother whispering a prayer before extinguishing the candle, a farmer marking the cross in the air before sleep. These small gestures bridged fear and gratitude. Darkness reminded them that control was an illusion, that life itself depended on forces far beyond their reach. Modern light has erased that lesson. Our nights are diluted, thinned out until they no longer feel like night at all. But in imagining theirs, you sense something humbling. They did not live in constant fear of what they could not see. They lived with it, spoke to it, even thanked it. Darkness for them was proof that the world was larger than human comfort, that faith began where light ended. And so, as the last ember fades, as the air cools and the stars reclaim the sky, you realize what they must have known all along. That night is not the opposite of life, but its mirror. It is where everything slows down enough to be heard. The creak of a beam, the murmur of a prayer, the heartbeat of a world that still turns without electricity. The darkness holds all of it, gently, endlessly, and waits, as it always has, for light to return. It began quietly, almost humbly, as all revolutions do, not with thunder or miracle, but with a small, persistent flame cupped in human hands. For thousands of years, light had been borrowed from the sky, sun by day, fire by night, both gifts, never guarantees. But somewhere near the end of the Middle Ages, humanity began to ask an almost blasphemous question. What if we could summon daylight at will? At first, the answer came in the simplest form. Oil, thick, fragrant, and precious, drawn from olives in the warm south and animal fat in colder lands. Clay lamps shaped by calloused fingers began to glow in windows and monasteries, their little wicks trembling like nervous hearts. The flame was uneven, smoky and short-lived, but it offered something that had never existed before, the illusion of control. For the first time, the dark could be postponed. In towns, lamplight shimmered on cobblestone streets, trembling in the wind. People gathered closer to it, not only for vision but for comfort, because it made the night seem smaller, more manageable. The lamp changed how people worked, how they prayed, how they dreamed. It extended evenings by an hour, sometimes two, enough to mend one more cloak, to write one more letter, to whisper one more story before sleep. Candles followed, humble at first, then refined. Tallow from beasts, wax from bees, oil from lamps. Each material carried its own scent, its own weight of labor. Making candles was messy, patient work, melting, dipping, cooling, dipping again. The wax thickened slowly, as light itself was coaxed into being. In monasteries, the smell of beeswax mingled with incense and damp stone. In peasant cottages, tallow burned unevenly, filling the air with a sour smoke that clung to everything. But still, it was light. Human-made, deliberate, defiant. People began to notice what they could do with it. Candles allowed reading after dusk for the rare few who could read at all. They let merchants tally accounts, physicians tend to the sick, mothers rock their children with one eye open longer than before. Light was no longer just a boundary. It was becoming a tool. Of course, it was expensive. Every hour of brightness came with a price measured in labor. The wealthy could fill their halls with flickering gold, chandeliers dripping with wax like time itself melting. The poor rationed their light the way they rationed food, carefully, sparingly, unwilling to waste a single flame. The division between classes began to shine, quite literally through the darkness. Those who could afford to burn the night lived differently from those who could not. And yet, even this imperfect light began to change how people thought. Darkness was no longer absolute. Fear gave way to curiosity. The stars above seemed a little closer when there was a candle below to mirror them. Humanity's oldest rhythm, dawn and dusk, work and rest, fear and trust, began to loosen ever so slightly, as if time itself was blinking awake. In castles, lamps were hung along corridors where stone once swallowed every sound. In cities, small lanterns appeared along main roads, though their flames were so weak they seemed to wander more than burn. Still, travellers welcomed them like friends. A pool of light, no matter how small, meant direction. A visible street corner meant safety, but for all the progress, the night refused to vanish. Beyond the reach of flame, darkness remained sovereign, vast, patient, and unbothered. It lingered in forests, alleys, churches, and dreams. Humanity had learned to carve small islands of brightness, but the sea of shadow was still infinite. And perhaps, in those early years of artificial light, people understood that they were not banishing the dark, only borrowing time from it. The lamp, the candle, the hearth, these were fragile beginnings, but they were enough to change the human mind forever, because once a person has seen the power of a light that does not depend on dawn, it becomes impossible to imagine a world entirely without it. And so, as the centuries turned and the hands of blacksmiths, alchemists, and inventors grew restless, the question deepened: if a flame could be summoned, could it also be perfected? The dark began to shrink, not in monasteries or palaces, but in the streets. By the 17th century, the night had new inhabitants. Small flames enclosed in glass, suspended from iron hooks, trembling in the wind like stars pulled down to earth. They were called lanterns, and their appearance changed the rhythm of civilization. In Paris, the first city bold enough to name itself La Ville Lumière, lanterns lined the main boulevards by decree. Oil, smoke, and soot became the new scent of evening. Every street, once surrendered to the silence of thieves and beggars, began to hum with cautious life. Coaches rattled longer into the night. Merchants kept their stalls open past dusk, and the city, for the first time, learned to breathe after sunset. It was not the bright light we know. Not yet. Each lantern burned weakly, its flame vulnerable to rain, to wind, to neglect. They needed tending. Thousands of them. And so, a new kind of worker emerged. The lamplighter. You can imagine them walking through the dark with long poles tipped in flame, pausing at each corner to coax a new star to life. Their movement itself was ritual, quiet, almost holy. In the hush of the early night, their footsteps marked the boundary between danger and safety, between blindness and sight. The idea spread like dawn through Europe. Amsterdam's canals glowed faintly on damp nights, reflections trembling across water. London, once infamous for the dangers of its foggy streets, ordered its own army of lamplighters to patrol every borough. Rome followed, then Berlin, then countless smaller towns that wanted to feel modern, civilized, awake. The cost was immense, but so was the fascination. The night was being rewritten, not conquered, not erased, but rewritten in glimmers and reflections. Darkness no longer meant helplessness. It began to mean possibility. Lovers walked later. Poets wrote longer. Thieves adapted. The boundary between day and night blurred, and humanity's sense of time began to stretch. The glow of 1,000 lanterns painted the cities amber. Windows shone like eyes. Rivers shimmered with stray reflections, and where once only silence reigned, music and conversation began to fill the air. For the first time, people could truly see one another after sunset, and with that came a subtle shift in how they thought about themselves. The city was no longer a place to hide from the dark. It had become a living constellation, a map of human ambition glittering against the black. And yet, beyond the city walls, the countryside remained as it had always been, silent, infinite, untouched. The peasants and shepherds who looked toward the glow of Paris or London from distant hills saw something miraculous but also unsettling, light that no longer obeyed the heavens, a man-made dawn that ignored the stars. It was beautiful. It was strange. And it was only the beginning, because soon the lanterns themselves would seem primitive, replaced by a brilliance so pure, so steady, that night would lose its ancient dominion forever. The 19th century arrived like a spark. For millennia, human life had moved in rhythm with the sun, rising, working, resting, sleeping. But now the pattern began to fracture. The first experiments with electricity were clumsy and unpredictable, more spectacle than science. Glass spheres, crackling wires, light that flashed and vanished in an instant. But even those brief flickers hinted at something divine. For the first time in history, light no longer needed fire. The change began in laboratories. Cold rooms filled with humming coils, copper and ozone. Men in waistcoats bent over their instruments, unaware that what they were building would alter the heartbeat of civilization. The names we now memorize, Volta, Faraday, Edison, were not magicians but midwives, helping something new and uncontrollable come into the world. When the first electric arc lamp was lit in the 1800s, people gasped. The flame was gone. In its place was a raw white brilliance that felt less like warmth and more like revelation. It hissed. It dazzled. It turned night into day in a single breath. Cities that had once flickered faintly with oil now blazed with a steady, almost arrogant glow. The lamplighter's pole became obsolete. The match, the candle, the oil flask, relics overnight. What had once been luxury became expectation. Darkness was no longer a visitor. It was an inconvenience. Electric light spread faster than faith. Paris and New York were the first to surrender their nights. Then came London, Berlin, St. Petersburg, each one a patch of human-made daylight glowing against the black. Entire districts glimmered like constellations, their reflections trembling on rivers and windows. People no longer looked up to the stars for guidance. They looked at shop windows, theatres and train stations that gleamed with a brilliance no sky could match. The rhythm of life shattered. Factories stayed open 24 hours a day, their machines spinning endlessly. Work no longer ended when the sun fell. Cities that once slept now hummed restlessly through the small hours. Even dreams seemed to retreat, replaced by the constant pulse of neon and noise. Humanity had created a new kind of day, one that never ended, one that no longer belonged to the natural world. But in this triumph, something delicate was lost. The silence that once cradled every night, the sacred pause between dusk and dawn, vanished beneath the hum of current. People stopped seeing darkness as holy. They began to fear it again, not because it was powerful, but because it had become unfamiliar. Electricity did not just illuminate the world, it rewired it. The distance between day and night collapsed. The stars faded from sight. The clock, once obedient to sunlight, became the new god of time. And yet, somewhere deep inside the human mind, the memory of that older rhythm still stirs, the feeling of lying in total darkness, hearing the soft breathing of others, and trusting that morning will return without our help. We built an endless night of our own making, but sometimes when the lights go out unexpectedly and silence returns, you can almost feel the presence of that ancient world again, calm, watchful, patient, waiting just beyond the reach of our inventions. We no longer know what true night feels like. We think we do. We close curtains, dim screens, switch off lamps, but even then a faint glow lingers somewhere, a whisper of electricity bleeding through every crack. Streetlights pour their pale orange hum through our windows. Devices blink softly in the corners of rooms. We have banished the dark, yet it still watches us, waiting for us to remember it. Our ancestors would not recognize our nights. They would stand in our cities and think the world had caught fire. Light stretches endlessly now, through offices, kitchens, highways, skies. The stars, once the map of every traveler, have vanished behind the veil of our progress. Children are born who have never seen the Milky Way. Night itself has become invisible. But darkness was once an art, something learned, practiced, and revered. To live in darkness was to listen differently, to move with care, to think slowly. It taught patience. It demanded imagination. It made people pay attention to what could not be seen: the rustle of wind through a field, the warmth of a shared bed, the whisper of prayer in a cold room. In darkness, the smallest light felt holy. A candle became a star, a fire, a sun. The loss of darkness changed more than our vision. It changed our minds. Our sleep grew thinner, our thoughts faster, our fears louder. We began to mistake brightness for safety, noise for connection, activity for life. The quiet hours that once healed the spirit are now filled with screens, with clocks, with restless illumination that never truly lets the mind rest. We live as if the world were afraid to close its eyes. And yet, sometimes, when power fails, when a storm cuts the current, when the street lamps go black, when the sky returns to its full, deep silence, something ancient stirs in us. The body remembers. The eyes adjust. The world grows larger again, and for a few fleeting moments we live as they did by the pulse of the hearth, the glow of the moon, the sound of our own breathing. Darkness was never empty. It was fullness of time, of stillness, of thought. It was the canvas upon which light became meaningful. We have traded that rhythm for convenience, and in doing so we have forgotten what it means to truly rest. If you stand one night far from cities where the air is black and stars return, you might feel it again, that strange comfort of not being able to see everything, of trusting the unseen to hold you. The dark does not ask for fear. It asks for surrender. The people of the Middle Ages understood this instinctively. They did not escape the night. They lived within it, and in doing so they understood something we have lost, that light is not the opposite of dark, but its partner, that one cannot exist without the other. We live now in an endless brightness, but our souls still long for that older rhythm, for the slow, soft silence that once taught us how to dream. Somewhere along the line we stopped sleeping the way our ancestors did, not because our bodies changed, but because our world forgot how to be still. The ancient rhythm, 2 sleeps divided by quiet reflection, prayers and dreams, dissolved when light became endless. Now the night no longer signals rest. It invites continuation. The factory hums, the phone glows, the clock insists. Time has no edge. Sleep, once sacred, has become a negotiation. We treat it like a task to complete rather than a landscape to wander through. Where medieval families drifted into slumber beside a crackling hearth, trusting the dark to hold them, we stare into blue screens that mimic daylight, feeding our minds the illusion of morning even as midnight deepens. Our bodies, confused and loyal, obey, but the rest they give us is shallow, fractured, incomplete. The brain, once soothed by darkness, now flinches from silence. Artificial light tells it to remain alert, to keep watch, to never fully let go, and so we lie awake longer. Our dreams shorten. The space where imagination once grew, that twilight zone between waking and sleep, begins to close. We fill it instead with scrolling, with noise, with 1,000 voices, none of which truly speak to us. In the medieval world, night belonged to contemplation. It was the hour of thought, of prayer, of whispered fears and hidden hopes. Now our nights belong to productivity, to messages, to deadlines, to endless light. The soul that once drifted freely between 2 sleeps is now tethered to an algorithm. Cities no longer sleep. They glow all night long, a million windows lit by insomnia. Airplanes move across the sky like moving stars. Roads hum with headlights at every hour. We have built a civilization allergic to silence, a planet that never closes its eyes. And yet, for all our brilliance, there is a quiet sadness beneath it, a fatigue that no caffeine, no medicine, no technology can cure, because sleep is not just a biological need. It is the last conversation we have with the universe each day. the one in which we surrender control and trust that life will continue without us for a little while. Our ancestors knew this. Their darkness made sleep a form of faith. They did not fear the night because they participated in it. Now, when we turn off the light, we do not enter silence. We enter anxiety. The phone vibrates, the streetlight leaks through the blinds, the world refuses to end. We have become the first species to live without night. And for all our inventions, it has made us tired in ways we do not understand. But maybe somewhere inside, that old rhythm still lives, waiting patiently, like an ember under ash. Maybe the body remembers how to rest when the mind forgets. Maybe the night still wants to teach us how to listen, how to breathe, how to trust the dark again. Because deep down, sleep is not weakness. It is the oldest prayer we still whisper every day without words. It seems that after centuries of chasing light, we have begun to miss the dark. Somewhere beneath the noise of the modern world, people are quietly turning off their lights, walking away from screens, and stepping outside again, not to escape, but to remember what it feels like to stand under a real night sky. Far from the cities, there are places where darkness still lives in its old form, thick, endless, absolute. In those places, the stars look impossibly sharp, and the air carries that strange stillness that once shaped the rhythm of every life. People travel miles just to experience it again, to feel what their ancestors felt every evening without effort. The hush, the vulnerability, the peace. It's set strange, isn't it? We invented the power to turn night into day, and yet, now that we have it, we long for darkness the way the thirsty long for water. It's as if some part of us knows that constant light makes the world smaller, that only in the dark can we truly see how vast everything is. In quiet cabins far from the grid, people light candles again. The flame dances, just as it did centuries ago, throwing shadows on wooden walls. The wind presses softly against the window, and for a moment time seems to dissolve. There are no notifications, no deadlines, no glare, just breath and silence, and the gentle flicker of something ancient. In those moments, the darkness does not feel like loss. It feels like permission to stop, to listen, to exist without demand. The night no longer belongs to fear. It belongs to peace. There are towns now that dim their lights at certain hours to let the stars return. Scientists study how true night heals the human brain, how sleep deepens when the world outside is genuinely dark. And perhaps, without meaning to, we are slowly finding our way back to that rhythm that once guided the medieval hearth, back to the soft patience of the natural world. The lesson was never really lost. It was only forgotten under layers of brilliance. The dark is still here, waiting behind every switch and every screen, patient and unchanged. It asks for nothing but attention. And maybe that is how all stories end. Not in light, but in the gentle reminder that without darkness, light has no meaning. If you ever find yourself unable to sleep, try this. Turn off everything. Sit quietly in the dark. Let the silence stretch until it starts to breathe with you. What you'll feel then is not emptiness. It's history. It's memory. It's the heartbeat of every generation that once lived by the fire, watching the same stars, trusting that dawn would always come. Because in the end, we do not escape the dark. We return to it, the same way the earth returns to night. And every light, no matter how strong, eventually flickers and rests. Darkness, in the end, was never our enemy. It was our oldest teacher, patient, quiet, endlessly forgiving. It taught us how to listen when there was nothing to see, how to wait when there was nothing to do, how to trust that warmth and morning would return even when every light was gone. It asked us to believe in cycles, not control, in rhythm, not command. For thousands of years, people met the dark with reverence. They sat around fires and measured time by the slow collapse of flame. They told stories not to pass the hours, but to remind each other that they were not alone in the void. Darkness was a place of gathering, of thought, of imagination. In the silence of night, Human minds stretched further than daylight ever allowed. Now we fill that same silence with noise. We flood every shadow with light, afraid of what it might contain, or worse, of what it might reveal about ourselves. We've built a world that never stops glowing, and yet we've never felt more tired, more restless, more hungry for rest that feels real. But the dark is still waiting for us. Every time the power goes out, every time you drive beyond the reach of the city's hum, every time you close your eyes and let the noise fade, you meet it again. That ancient presence that held your ancestors, that watched them breathe, that listened to the first songs ever sung by firelight. In its stillness, there sits a kind of mercy. It doesn't demand productivity or performance. It doesn't measure your worth. It simply accepts you, sightless, speechless, unfinished, and offers you something the modern world cannot wrest without condition. When we lose darkness, we lose depth. We forget how to see what isn't obvious. But when we reclaim it, even for a night, we remember what being human feels like. Small, tender, temporary, and yet infinite. So perhaps the lesson of those long medieval nights is not about survival at all. It's about surrender. It's about knowing that the world does not need our constant light to keep turning. That silence is not emptiness, and that real peace begins not in brightness, but in the soft return of dark. Because somewhere between the fading fire and the first sound of birdsong, in that thin and fragile space where night slowly gives itself to dawn, humanity learned how to dream and how to begin again. Night has always had a shape. It begins as a slow folding of the world, a soft dimming at the edges of things, and then it deepens, not as absence but as presence, a living, breathing space where the mind stretches further than the eye can reach. The people of the Middle Ages understood this intuitively. They did not fear night as much as they respected its weight. They let it guide them, slow them, cradle them until the first light returned. We, their descendants, have turned that shape inside out. We live in a constant glow, a brightness so thick that shadows can barely form. But brightness without contrast is blindness. When everything shines, nothing stands out. When every hour hums, no hour can truly rest. We have conquered the night, and in doing so we've made it harder to find ourselves. Yet the shape of night is not gone. It waits patiently in the quiet spaces between things. In the forest after the last lamp dies, in the hum before sleep, in the heartbeat that steadies when you finally stop searching for signal. It is the curve of silence that bends around your thoughts, the invisible shelter that still holds the stars in place. The medieval world lived by this rhythm. Light came, light left, and people learned to live in the gap. That gap was not emptiness. It was meaning. It was time to breathe, to think, to feel small and safe inside the immensity of the universe. We have tried to fill that space with noise and light, but the dark remains beneath everything, the quiet spine of existence. One day perhaps we will learn again what they already knew, that darkness is not a mistake, not a failure of light, but the canvas that makes life visible. So if you ever find yourself standing outside at the edge of evening, watching the sky fade to ash, do not hurry inside. Stay there a while. Listen as the world slows. Feel how everything softens once the light is gone. This stillness, this hush, this ancient rhythm is the shape of night. It is the same night your ancestors knew, the same one that held their fears and their dreams, the same one that still waits to hold yours. And as you breathe with it, quietly, eyes half closed, you realize something beautiful and simple. That even after all these centuries, night has never left us. We just had to remember how to see it again. The return of light was not sudden. It crept back into human life the same way dawn touches the horizon, shyly, uncertainly, testing what had once belonged to the dark. Long before electricity, there was oil, thick, fragrant, drawn from olives or animal fat, stored in clay lamps that flickered unevenly, glowing like captured embers. Each lamp was a small victory, a controlled miracle that brought a few more minutes of wakefulness. For the first time, night began to bend, ever so slightly to human will. The world changed in quiet ways. In towns, craftsmen worked longer. Letters were written by the trembling light of oil lamps. Merchants counted coins after sunset. A thin thread of brightness began to weave itself into what had always been darkness. But oil was temperamental. It smoked, it stank, it demanded patience. A careless touch could spill it. A spark could turn a lamp into disaster. So when wax appeared, beeswax, pale and pure, the world took another breath forward. The flame burned steadier, the air cleared, and light became gentle enough to invite intimacy. Candles became symbols as much as tools. A single one on a table was enough to gather people, to draw faces from shadow, to make even poverty look sacred. It's strange how small a circle of light can feel infinite when surrounded by darkness. The medieval world understood that balance instinctively, how the night made the smallest flame feel like salvation. By the 14th century, entire industries revolved around light. Chandlers, wickmakers, merchants of wax, all serving a hunger that was no longer spiritual alone. Cities wanted brightness, and as trade expanded, so did illumination. Torches burned at gates, lanterns swung above markets, cathedrals shimmered with hundreds of flames that turned worship into spectacle. The church's light was literal now, glowing across stone, declaring itself visible even to the illiterate. But the night pushed back. Always. Wind snuffed flames, wax melted unevenly, oil ran out. The dark waited patiently at the edge of every pool of light, reminding people that control was never complete. Every flame was borrowed time. Still, something irreversible had begun. The human eye grew greedy. If we could command a candle, why not a street? If we could make a market glow, why not an entire city? The question lingered through centuries, passing from monks to merchants to inventors. In the 17th century, gas arrived, an alchemy of coal and fire, harnessed and piped into iron lamps that hissed and burned with steady brilliance. For the first time, night could be defeated on a large scale. London, Paris, Berlin, cities that had once vanished after dusk began to shimmer, streets filled with sound again. People lingered, shops stayed open. The economy stretched into hours that had never existed before. Night no longer belonged to silence or prayer. It belonged to commerce. The same fire that had once kept peasants warm now drove empires forward, and as the lamps multiplied, something subtle but immense changed in the human heart. Darkness, once a companion, became an inconvenience, and light, our oldest, rarest friend, became ordinary. When light finally conquered the streets, the world forgot how to stop. Gas lamps lined the boulevards of London, Paris, and Berlin like veins of flame pulsing through fog and stone. The first cities that never slept were not built from iron or ambition alone. They were built from light. Before that, darkness had defined the boundary of every human life. It told you when to rest, when to pray, when to wait. Now, that boundary dissolved. Shops remained open past sunset. Taverns glowed like small galaxies. The poor worked longer shifts. The rich dined later into the night. A new rhythm emerged, one without pause, one that fed on its own brilliance. It was beautiful. At first, imagine walking through Paris in 1820, when gaslight first poured across the Seine. The reflections trembled like liquid stars. Couples lingered on bridges long after midnight. For the first time, people began to explore night not as fear, but as freedom. The shadows that had once hidden danger now hid possibility. Writers, musicians, and painters followed this glow. They called it modernity, the awakening of civilization after dark. The night became a stage. Cafes filled with debate and smoke. Printing presses clattered until dawn, and letters crossed continents faster than ever before. Humanity had stretched its day into eternity. But beneath the shimmer, exhaustion grew. Gaslight burned dirty and heavy. It blackened ceilings, stung eyes, poisoned lungs, and yet people refused to turn it off. Factories ran 24 hours. Workers lived by shifts instead of seasons. The gentle rhythm that once guided the body, dusk to dawn, rise to rest, fractured. Sleep became optional. Night became labor. There sips a quiet irony in it. For thousands of years, light was sacred because it was rare. Now that it was everywhere, it became invisible. And when electricity arrived, silent, odorless, tireless, it sealed the transformation. The flick of a switch replaced the trembling of the matchstick. The hum of current replaced the crackle of flame. The world no longer waited for morning. It manufactured it. By the early 20th century, night had lost its hold on humanity. New York called itself the city that never sleeps. Tokyo glittered like a sky turned upside down. Light poured into every window, down every alley, into every dream. The stars, once the first calendar, the first compass, the first mystery, disappeared behind a haze of progress. And yet, even as the darkness retreated, something ancient in the human heart mourned its loss. Because in conquering the night, we also silenced the voice that once spoke to us through it, the quiet that shaped our thoughts, the stillness that taught us to listen. The first sleepless cities believed they were escaping the past. In truth, they were only dimming it, covering it with a light that never truly rests. Electricity did not simply replace darkness, it erased it. When the first filaments glowed, the world gasped, and then, almost immediately, forgot how extraordinary it was. The miracle became background noise. Light no longer flickered or faltered. It no longer smoked or hissed or burned. It simply existed everywhere, always, without question. And that changed everything. Cities bloomed in unnatural color. Neon signs spilled pink and green into the night. The electric bulb became both symbol and substance of the new century. Darkness, once a presence, became an inconvenience, a glitch, something to fix. Factories ran 24 hours without pause. Newspapers were printed before dawn. Hospitals glowed like small suns. And above it all, the grid hummed, invisible and omnipresent, a nervous system stretched across continents. For the first time, the world shared a single heartbeat of light. The rhythm of human life fractured. There was no longer an agreed hour to stop. Midnight lost its meaning. People began to live in shifts, not days and nights, but cycles of output and exhaustion. Even sleep became scheduled, timed, optimized. But beneath the brilliance, shadows deepened in new ways. Light does not only reveal, it also blinds. And when there is no true darkness, the eye forgets how to rest. The psychologists noticed it first. The fatigue that could not be slept away. The anxiety that hummed like current beneath every thought. Then doctors. Then philosophers. All agreeing quietly that something essential had gone missing. We had traded the mystery of the night for an illusion of control. And control, once endless, becomes its own kind of cage. People tried to build substitutes for darkness. Curtains, eye masks, blue light filters. But these were imitations, not absolutions. True night, the kind that hums and breathes and holds you in its vastness, cannot be recreated by blocking light. It must be allowed to return. And so the modern world glows, sleepless and radiant. Highways shimmer at 3 a.m. Airplanes cross time zones like migrating constellations. Screens pulse in bedrooms where people pretend to rest. We live beneath an artificial dawn that never ends. Yet, if you look closely, really look, you'll still find small pockets of darkness surviving. A farmhouse miles from the grid. A stretch of forest where the stars still break through. A cabin with no signal, only the slow whisper of wind. In those places, the silence feels almost alive, as if the earth itself exhales when the last bulb goes dark. And there, for a moment, you remember. That night was never an absence to be conquered. It was the world's oldest act of mercy, the pause between heartbeats, the breath between days. It started, as most things do, with silence. A few people, scattered across the world, began turning things off. Not out of nostalgia, not as protest, but because something inside them whispered that the world had become too bright to dream. They sought darkness not as escape, but as medicine. Astronomers were among the first. They looked up one evening and realized that the sky, the same sky that had once guided ships, shepherds, kings, was gone. The Milky Way had vanished under the veil of human light. So they began to protect patches of sky, places called dark sky reserves, where streetlights were lowered, windows shaded, and people could finally see the heavens as they were. It was more than science. It was restoration. Children who had never seen a real constellation stared upward in silence, as if witnessing an ancient language rediscovered. The night in those places was not frightening. It was immense, infinite, healing. Others followed. Writers went to cabins with no electricity. Monks revived old traditions of nocturnal prayer. Travelers wandered into deserts and forests just to feel darkness wrap around them again. And slowly, quietly, the idea spread that the dark was not something to survive, but something to return to. In the deepest kind of night, everything begins to hum again. The world, the self, the pulse of something vast that had been drowned by the brightness. The eyes soften, the mind slows, the body remembers a rhythm it thought was lost. In those hours, thought changes texture. It becomes slower, rounder, kinder. Without constant light, time loosens its grip. You start to feel the weight of distance, the patience of things that do not rush to be seen. The dark stops being a mirror for fear and becomes a cradle for rest. Entire communities have started to dim their lights on purpose. Cities like Reykjavik, Flagstaff, and Ronda have learned to share the stars again. Hotels now offer blackout retreats, where people pay not for luxury but for quiet, for a room without a single LED, for a night where they can finally sleep without interruption. The irony is gentle and profound. After centuries of fighting darkness, we are beginning to chase it. We are learning what our ancestors already knew, that without the night, there is no dawn, only fatigue disguised as progress. You can feel the change coming slowly, like the first breath after stormlight fades. The world is remembering itself. And maybe that is what rebirth truly means. Not invention, but recollection. Because darkness was never lost. It was waiting, patient and unchanged, just beyond the glow. There will come a time, perhaps soon, perhaps long after we're gone, when the world learns to rest again. Not because it has grown tired of light, but because it has remembered its weight. The bright hum of cities will fade a little, one bulb at a time. People will begin to close their laptops, not out of discipline, but out of tenderness. They will look up, and above them the sky will be waiting, vast, dark, and forgiving. The rhythm will return. Evening will no longer be a leftover piece of day, but a threshold, a place where the mind slows and the heart begins to listen again. We will still have light, but we will use it differently, not to drown out the dark, but to speak softly within it. Lamps will glow like old hearths, quiet and human, reminding us that the purpose of light was never to conquer night, but to share it. And when people once again gather in dim rooms, when they speak in low voices, when the fire crackles and the stars breathe just beyond the window, something ancient will stir. The world will feel wider. Sleep will come easier. Dreams will deepen. Because the truth that the Middle Ages knew and that we forgot is that darkness is not the absence of life. It is the space that allows life to breathe. Without darkness, there can be no rhythm. Without silence, no song. Without night, no morning that feels earned. So tonight, as the noise of the world hums somewhere far away, let the darkness return, not as fear, but as friend. Let it cover what doesn't need to be seen. Let it hold you the way it held those before us, in the long centuries when light was fragile and time was slow. Close your eyes. The same stars that once watched over them are still watching over you. And somewhere, beyond the walls, beyond the hum of electricity and the whisper of history, the world is exhaling, finally, into quiet. Night has not ended. It has only been waiting for us to come back.